Excellent. Like I mentioned, today's webinar will be recorded, and we look forward to distributing that to the entire list of webinar registrations. Yeah, big thank you to everybody for joining us. Speaking is Jerry Van Dalen. I'm the sales manager here at Smarter Commerce. We're also joined by Alex Rodriguez, who's our director of technical services. Excited for the content that we have for today's webinar. We're going to be taking a closer look at PCI compliance and the related security topics, especially from a JD Edwards first perspective. A couple of housekeeping items, and then I will hand it off to Alex to walk us through the slide deck and information that we have today. First and foremost, we encourage Q&A during this webinar. So if you want to use the Q&A functionality in the Zoom platform administrative sort of the taskbar or the bar on your webinar panel, you can use that. Feel free to type in questions. Alex and myself will be looking at that throughout the webinar and hope to address many of those. We do plan to have a couple of minutes at the end of our session today to address any outstanding questions, but throughout the session, feel free to put those in there. We look forward to the session today. I don't think I have any other housekeeping items here. So with that said, Alex, I'll let you take over here.
Okay, thank you, Jerry, and good afternoon to everybody that's in attendance here. Nice to see we have some customers of ours on the call. So hopefully this will be a informative session on PCI, and I will try to keep it as light as possible. It's obviously a very important topic, but want to try to get as much detail in there in the time that we have. So a little bit on Smarter Commerce for those of you that don't know us. We've got over 30 years of experience with JD Edwards projects, and over the last 20 years, we've had a line of products called Smarter Commerce, and we've implemented over 500 plus projects and counting. And for today, we really want to focus on PCI and security. Given that Smarter Commerce interacts with payments in many aspects of the solution, PCI is an important part of the security landscape that we have to consider. So today I'm going to focus entirely on PCI and initially just discuss what is PCI DSS, some of the standards and guidelines, why you need to be concerned about PCI, and then how you can use both JD Edwards and Smarter Commerce to effectively take payments without taking on any additional security risk. I will have an interactive demo and show some of our JD Edwards integrated software, and specifically focus on what type of PCI requirements are needed depending on how you use our solution. So first off, what is PCI DSS? It's one of those terms that everybody talks about, but maybe not everybody's gotten in and kind of understanding it at the level that is necessary to make sure that you can meet all the requirements. So the first thing is it's really just a common set of industry tools and ways to keep obviously secure data, such as credit card numbers, keep that data secure. And the other thing is it's not a law or a regulation, but the different card brands have joined together to make sure that their merchants that take credit cards are following a set of guidelines, and that they're not, misusing or improperly handling card data, which can lead obviously to, identity theft and quite a bit of, fraud, which obviously can impact businesses, et cetera. So that's a little bit about what is PCI DSS. It's been around for almost 20 years, and there's been a series of different versions that have been made available. So there's a little bit of a history here of the different versions from, the first version, 1.1 in September 2006, all the way through, almost 6 or 7 years later, version 3 came out. And really around version 3.1 is when I think, the industry as a whole really started paying more attention to PCI and its importance. And then it's evolved over the years. PCI 3.2 introduced, um, some additional requirements around, multi-factor authentication, just general card handling. And then 3.2.1 came out in 2018. Some minor clarifications to SSL and TLS handling. And then about almost 2 years ago, PCI 4.0 came out, and that is obviously the latest standard that all organizations are trying to maintain at this point. So I'm happy to report that Smarter Commerce, as an organization, has undertaken its last validation under the 4.0 standard. So I'll talk a little bit more on that today. But as an organization, you really need to be familiar with what are the standards that you have to be working with. It's important to note that within a couple of months in May of 2024, the 3.2.1 standard is going to essentially expire. So any validations that have occurred under that standard need to be reviewed and redone. So as far as the different security standards and areas around PCI, depending on what business you're in, there different standards apply. So just to kind of walk through this, there's organizations that create payment devices. One of our payment gateways that we partner with, Braintree, has devices that are made by Verifone that are essentially chip and pin and can take credit cards. That'd be an example of a kind of a payment terminal. So organizations like Verifone would have to go through those type of standards. Then the next is it's software developers that create actual payment applications. Smarter Commerce initially, in the first few versions of the software, did create payment applications that actually handled credit card data directly. We no longer create payment applications since we partner with different gateways and actually leverage their technology using iframes to handle the card data. So we've evolved into what is known as a service provider, where we are assisting with the process of making a payment transaction, end to end, but we're not essentially the developer of the solution that handles the actual card data. We're kind of a bridge that passes the information along, and I will get into some more detail. And then all of those different areas all fall under the umbrella of the PCI security and compliance. So you as an organization are what is considered a merchant, because you're actually accepting card data for payment through JD Edwards using Smarter Commerce. Some guidelines are on cardholder data. There's certain pieces of information that cannot be stored ever, such as the card security code, which has got different names there. It's the CSC, sometimes it's called a CVV, but essentially the 3 digits that appear on the back of a card, that's information that can never be stored. But cardholder data can be stored, but it has to be stored securely. With Smarter Commerce, we don't store any card data. As I mentioned, we leverage the handful of payment gateways that we partner with, and they are the ones that take on the responsibility of storing the card data. The only information that we store within JD Edwards is references to the actual card data that's stored externally. So PCI itself has 12 core requirements, and all of those have different sub requirements, and if anybody's ever taken a look at what's called an SAQ, a self-assessment questionnaire, there is quite a bit of information that has to be reviewed and completed in order to achieve compliance. One of the things that we try to do as an organization is provide methods for our customers to limit the scope of what is required for PCI. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and actually show some scenarios a little later, just so that you can understand with our solution how you would be able to meet all the requirements with the minimum amount of effort. Because again, as an organization, we go through a full report on compliance as a service provider, and I can attest that it's a lot of work, a lot of documentation, a lot of procedures and controls that have to be in place. And it's not something that you just do once. It's an ongoing, continuous effort. So anything that can be done to minimize the need to go through all that as a customer of ours, that's our goal, is to really make the process as seamless as possible so that you can have the ability to take a variety of different types of payments and grow your business without putting a strain on your security organization. Some terms, just to make sure that everybody's clear on the differences between, kind of a who's who. So there's really four main terms here, just to kind of understand this. There's acquirers, are the actual banks or merchants, the bank or entity the merchant uses to process their payments. So we partner with different acquirers with our gateways. The issuers are banks or organizations that actually issue the payment card on behalf of a payment brand. So, when you have a MasterCard or a Visa, they're issued by different banks. You could have a Bank of America, Wells Fargo, just as an example. So, and in some cases, the bank, it can be both an issuer and an acquirer, as Amex, Discover are. So merchants are entities that accept organizations. So all of you that are, on representing, a customer of ours, you're essentially merchants. So, and then service providers, Smarter Commerce is now, as I mentioned before, a level 1 service provider. And because we essentially, using our Smarter Commerce Pay Cloud, we are kind of the bridge that allows JD Edwards to interconnect with different payment gateways to accept credit card payments. Merchant level overview. This is important because depending on the volume of transactions that you handle as a merchant, that can determine, some of the requirements as far as, what type of compliance you have to go through. The more transactions you take, the more likely you're going to need to do kind of a full report on compliance as opposed to a self-assessment questionnaire. And there's a big difference in timing and cost depending on which one you have to go through. If you have to go through, if you're in the case where you're taking over 6 million transactions annually, then you unfortunately will need to go through a full report on compliance. For the other levels, you're able to essentially perform a self-assessment questionnaire, present that to your bank as evidence that you are meeting the requirements, but there is no third party that has to approve any of the things that you're doing. So it's essentially kind of on the honor system where you have to be doing everything that it says, but there's nobody that is kind of auditing the work that's being done. But in any case, you still have to meet those requirements. Service provider levels are listed here. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, Smarter Commerce is a PCI 4.0 validated level 1 service provider. We achieved our 4.0 validation in June of last year. And, if any customers want, the attestation of compliance documentation, we can provide that. And we worked with a QSA called ERM Protect that has helped us over the last 3 years with all of our compliance needs. So, and they will continue to help us going forward for, future validations that we have to undergo. And again, because we process over 300,000 transactions as in combination for all of our customers, we then are a level 1 and we have to go through the annual report on compliance. The next area here I'm going to discuss is the self-assessment questionnaires. There's essentially 8 different self-assessment questionnaires, and one of the things I want to do here is kind of clear up any confusion or doubts on which SAQ would apply for as a customer. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on all of them, and highlight specifically the ones that would be generally required by customers. One note here, Smarter Commerce is not a QSA, meaning we're not a qualified security assessor. We partner with one. So, any recommendations or any observations that come out of the session are merely guidelines to assist, in knowing, which SAQ you need. But any final determinations usually should be validated by, an independent QSA. So with that being said, the main type here that I want to highlight is SAQA, which this one would fall for most customers that are taking card not present transactions. So generally, if you're in JD Edwards and you're taking a credit card payment, you're receiving it, over the phone or through some mechanism, and that data needs to be keyed in to JD Edwards or entered some way into JD Edwards. We have, and I'll walk through some scenarios, we have mechanisms in place with our newest versions of Smarter Commerce that allow for customers to outsource or to kind of push that requirement of card entry out to their customers so that they can do kind of a self-service payment, or, and essentially take that responsibility away from, employees in your organization. And if you're able to do that, then you can actually qualify for an SAQA, which is the simplest of all of the self-assessment questionnaires. I believe the 4.0 version is somewhere around 8 to 10 pages long, whereas some of the other ones can be in the hundreds of pages as far as all the requirements. So there's a few others. There's a AEP, which is more on the e-commerce side. So for customers that use our e-commerce solution, this is one that potentially can apply. B is more for terminals and machines, and this one generally doesn't apply. The other one here that I want to highlight out of the 5 that are listed here is an SAQC, which I believe most customers are going to fall under when they use our solution if they're taking card data and actually entering it into JD Edwards. And we'll walk through kind of a flow chart on the next slide that shows how you can determine and select which is your QSA. So if we start out at the top here, service, are you a service provider? Then SAQD. So Smarter Commerce has to go through the full and most complex self-assessment questionnaire, which if you're having somebody else do your full report on compliance, the questions are the same. It's really about who's verifying and validating the information. If you do the work independently, then once the work is completed, there is no audit that needs to take place. If you have to go through the full report on compliance, then a third party will kind of guide you and make sure that all evidence has been submitted and is valid. And then once that's all completed, then they can sign off and say, okay, you've met all the requirements. So storage of cardholder data. None of our customers that are using any of the newer versions have any storage of cardholder data. We did have some older, very old versions where we did store cardholder data, but those go back 10, 15 years. So I don't believe any customers are going to fall under that. if you're accepting payments using a payment terminal, then you could potentially fall under the SAQ P2PE. But the area where most customers are going to fall is in is going to be under this bottom one here, the MOTO, which is mail order, telephone order transactions. So what's important here is kind of following this along. If you accept them, but the cardholder data functions are fully outsourced to a PCI DSS compliant service provider, which Smarter Commerce is, and there's no storage of cardholder data. So we don't store any cardholder data within JD Edwards. And there is no processing or transmission on merchant systems or premises, which if you implement our authorization by email, you can meet this SAQA, but you have to put all the proper controls to make sure that there's no place within the solution that card data can be entered manually. If the card data is entered manually, then you would fall into the SAQC, where you're using a payment app, which would be JD Edwards on a PC. So essentially, once you have to key the card data in, then you fall under a different self-assessment questionnaire, which has a lot more complexity. So that's kind of all I wanted to cover as far as the SAQs. A little more on Smarter Commerce in relation to the catalog of products that we have, and where the solution that we're going through and discussing today, which is PCI related to payment processing. So what's important to understand here is, independent of the products that you have licensed from Smarter Commerce, whether you're using call center management, e-commerce, retail, POS, or our Avitex connector, anything around payments is all going to be integrated and work the same way, independent of what's your entry point into our solution. So if you're just using JD Edwards, then you have the payment processing piece. And then you can see here that we have partnerships with 6 different organizations for different services. Most of the ones listed here are payment gateways for taking credit cards. We also have a partnership with CSG Forte for ACH type payments, which is kind of a separately licensed Smarter Commerce product. But a lot of customers, for flexibility, will take ACH payments in addition to taking credit card payments to give customers options. So if you want to get paid, you got to give customers options so that they can have little to no excuse to not make on-time payments. So that's a little bit on Smarter Commerce and the different products. Smarter Commerce and PCI. So just in general, what's been the history of Smarter Commerce and how we've dealt with and used PCI. So our version 3.0, 4.0, and 5.0, we went through initially in the late early 2000s and early 2010s. We went through what's called a PADSS verification, so Payment Application Data Security Standard. But because we actually did store card data encrypted within JD Edwards tables. But once we moved up to our version 6.1, we introduced the capability where we no longer would store any of that card data within JD Edwards, but instead we rely on all the payment gateways to provide an iframe. So the card data entry is directly posted to the different payment gateways, PayPal, Braintree, etc. So at that point, we no longer fell under PA-DSS validation requirements. So with version 6.1, customers had the option to deploy using our Pay Cloud, or they could opt to deploy on-premise. The requirements for PCI are dramatically different depending on if you're using, on-premise systems or our systems that we have in the Pay Cloud, our software as a service. And I'll talk a little bit more in the next slides about some of the benefits of the Pay Cloud. But with the deployment of our version 7.2 and higher, you have the ability to have most PCI requirements for payment servers covered by Smarter Commerce as a level 1 provider. So again, I'll kind of walk through the different scenarios so that you can see, what you need to do configuration and usage wise to make sure that you're almost eliminating PCI compliance needs. And again, deployments that have on-premise credit card entry have increased responsibilities. So that's an important note. So essentially, one of the benefits of our cloud-based solution is that we don't require any additional hardware, meaning our software installs into JD Edwards, and then it plugs in and connects to our pay cloud. That obviously can save you on hardware and software licenses that you may need for some of our older versions or different solutions. And then it'll accelerate implementation since you don't have to set up any hardware. And then you don't need anybody to actually manage those systems. The hosting fees that we have for the pay cloud include all the resources to keep the systems up and running. And with the pay cloud, we also provide testing servers to allow you to test the solution and verify and validate that everything is working as expected. The other area that our pay cloud provides is we greatly reduce PCI hassles. So first off, everything is tokenized and it's stored within the different payment gateways. Our solution is fully in the cloud. And then as I mentioned, you have the ability to reduce the scope if you're using the hosted payment pages and email capabilities within JD Edwards. And then it simplifies the effort required to complete the self-assessment questionnaire. So in general, most of our customers are going to fall either in an A or a C for the self-assessment questionnaire. So I'm going to switch gears now and go into a demonstration of different payment scenarios and our pay cloud. So just give me a second here to shift over to my browser here. So I'm have a 9.2 demonstration environment here, and I'm going to go ahead and sign in. And I'm going to walk through 2 or 3 different payment scenarios that most customers use. So I'm going to go into sales order entry. I'll put in my sold to, put in a customer PO. For those that are not familiar with Smarter Commerce, in order to trigger our applications to come up within JD Edwards, you have to specify a payment instrument that is tied to as a credit card payment. In this case, the question mark does that. Our solution out of the box is installed via application software updates that go into JD Edwards. And then there's a series of paper enhancements that have to be applied. In this case, for this to work, a small paper enhancement was applied to the P42-101 sales order entry that essentially puts logic that if there's a payment instrument of question mark, then upon completing the order, just putting an item number here, upon completing the order, hitting submit and enter new or submit and close, it calls logic to open up a different application. So this application is actually a PQ67 application. Q67 is the system or product code assigned to Smarter Commerce. So that's essentially, that logic is what calls out to this application. So once you get into our payment application, you'll notice that you have, this customer has a card on file. So I could make a payment with a credit card on file. And the way the cards on file work is that it's storing a token that represents the card number, and it allows you to make a payment with that card. So as an example, if I just put a test card security code and I say auth credit card on file, I get an authorization and I can hit OK to place the order. So at that point, I was able to place an order with a card on file. So that's one scenario. What's important to note, and we'll walk through it with that scenario, is that when that card is stored and read, if that card is entered externally and not directly through JD Edwards, I'll show you when you do an order via email. If that card is entered not by somebody, then you can leverage that capability to again maintain a lower, less requirements for PCI compliance. So, okay, again, I put a question mark. Go ahead and put in same product. I'll do submit and enter new. In this case, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to authorize with a new credit card. This is a very common scenario that most customers use. So when I hit authorize with new credit card, it's going to bring up another tab, and it's going to bring up. So this is basically, if you notice here, this is using our version 7.2 demo PayCloud. So this is a page that is hosted in the cloud, but what appears here, this box, is an iframe. In this case, we have it configured to use the Braintree payment gateway. So I'm going to put in a test credit card. I have to put a future, a date, and card security code. When I hit apply, it's going to verify this against the test, their test payment gateway. If this was live, it would actually go all the way out to the bank and return an authorization and actually hold those funds within the customer's card. So once I come back, I have to hit update info. This is an important step because what this does is it pulls the information that is in the cloud into JD Edwards. So that update info actually writes that data into JD Edwards. So now I hit OK. So that's a second scenario. So that scenario obviously has, there's more complexity as far as the way the card is being entered and how it flows through systems. So under that scenario, if you were doing if you use that through your environment, you would fall under an SAQC. So let me do one last scenario here. Again, I have to put a question mark for the payment instrument. And I will do save and continue. And under this last scenario, I'm going to do submit and close. It's the last one we're going to do. I'm going to do the authorize by message. Now, hit the button. I'm going to pick a customer, hit select email. So upon clicking OK, this is going to trigger the sending of an email. So I have this test environment set to send the email, to my email address. Normally in a live mode, it will send it to the customer that it will send it to the customer. So let me see if that email has come in. Okay, so the email has come in. And so this is basically the email. It says order payment process, dear HD Capital Supply Group. Thank you for your purchase. By clicking Pay Now button below and completing, you agree to pay. So it has the information of the order, the amount, and then it has a Pay Now button. The Pay Now button actually opens up a link on the Smarter Commerce Cloud, and then you have the ability to make different types of payments. So you can do an ACH payment, you can do a PayPal payment if you have that licensed. In this case, I'm going to do a credit card payment. This again is an iframe, looks the same as what we saw within JD Edwards. So I will go ahead and make the payment. And I think I put one too many ones. And then this is a very important checkbox here, because if you put this save, it will actually store that card within the JD Edwards credit card on file table, so that if a customer wants to make a payment, the next time you won't have to send them an email. You can say, can we use the card on file that we have? And the beauty of this is that that card on file was not entered by anybody in your organization. It was entered externally. So that dramatically changes the amount of PCI requirements that you need to have in place. So, okay, so that payment has been made. And one important note here, and I'll go through it, is that that payment is not in JD Edwards until the batch processes that uh, run. There's batch processes that run that will actually pull the payment information that was made, via email and write that into JD Edwards. So, as part of the implementation, these UBEs would be set up and there'd be process flow put in place so that orders are not released until there's a payment made. So, and these email payment capabilities can be used in other areas, not just sales order. They can be used in accounts receivable to pay invoices, and even scheduled emails can go out. So there's a lot of capabilities that are important to understand. So that's essentially kind of a demo on the JDE side. I do want to highlight also a few things on our Pay Cloud. So I'm logging into our demo Pay Cloud. As customers, you would have your own URL with your customer, and then the version, and then also you would have one for tests. So I'm going to go ahead and log into our demo. I'll go to the Premier Demo Workspace. And this is a little bit of the view that most customers would see. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the capabilities here, especially for any customers that might be on older releases and not yet at 7.2. One important note with the Pay Cloud is we're constantly evolving the solution and putting in updates. I would say we're probably updating 3 to 4 times annually with different updates, and those are put in seamlessly. For the most part, because we're changing things outside of JD Edwards. When we have major releases, then there'll be updates that you have to do within JD Edwards. But within 7.2, we've gone through, I think we're up to already over a dozen different updates that have been pushed through with no requirement for customers to make any changes. So you can define users here. You can define, email capabilities and settings. So this is how we set up the email piece. You can register what email address is the one that is going to be sending. So as part of the setup process, it's important that you select what domain is going to send the emails, and then what address, so that we can control fraudulent emails from going out. So there's email templates where you can customize. So this order payment request that I just received, you have the ability to customize it. There's XSLT here that you can customize it. You can preview it so you can see what it looks like, put your logo, etc. So a lot of capabilities and power here to customize what appears. You also have the ability to customize the payment page that comes up, the hosted page, if you wanted to brand that with your logo. They're set up for payment surcharges if you wanted to, configure that. Under payment provider connections, you can set up, different payment providers. We obviously partner with PayPal, Braintree, eBanks, and then there's also a few others for Australia and Latin America. So we also have capabilities around a virtual terminal where you can actually make payments directly in the Pay Cloud. You can set up payment devices if you are using our point of sale, or you're using devices connected directly into JD Edwards. And then you have the security aspects of API tokens. There's a specific token that has to be plugged into the application in order to verify the identity when a request is made. And the same with IP addresses. They have to match, or you'll get a rejection. So a lot of capabilities within the Pay Cloud that have changed over the years. So definitely, if you're if you have the solution in place, take a look at what's out there because there's a lot of new functionality. The last thing I want to kind of highlight here is just, from a security perspective, there's different tools that we use to make sure that, our servers are secure. And there's one tool by Qualys and it's SSL Labs. It's kind of a tester that you can go through to make sure that your site is secure. So as part of everything that we go through on the compliance side, we have to make sure that we have all the requirements in place. So as you can see, these are the results of scanning our cloud, different IPs for the load balanced hosts that we have. And in our case, we got an A+ grade, which is nice to share. So a lot of work behind making sure that that's secured. And then that's pretty much on the demo side what I want to go through. So let me flip back over to the slideshow. And what I want to do now is just recap a little bit of what we talked about. So we demonstrated 3 scenarios. We demonstrated entering a sales order with a new credit card, and that would fall under an SAQC. But if the 2 other scenarios that we looked at that didn't involve the entering of card data into JD Edwards, those will qualify for SAQA because you're limiting the movement of card data through the solution. So essentially, by not having the card entered by anybody in your organization and outsourcing that to your customer, then that has a lot of advantages because customers don't have to give their number over the phone. A lot of people are becoming less comfortable with that. So, having the ability where they can control that number and make the payment themselves, that right now is something that a lot of people are happy to do. So why not take advantage of that and limit your own PCI? So those are both SAQA. So the last piece I want to kind of walk through is each of the different transactions. I just want to walk through, the different touch points in our solution and how it works. So I'm going to cover, an SAQC type transaction and then an SAQA just so you can see, the flow of the card data. So in this case, when we click the authorize with new credit card button, that's going to connect via 443 HTTPS to the payment server and open a web page that has the summary order information. And then the hosted checkout iframe appears. So that's the first step. The next thing is your customer service representative is going to enter the credit card data into the payment gateway hosted iframe, and then they click on Pay Now. So in that case, the card data actually does go from the end user's computer to the payment gateway, but it is still flowing through your network. So that's where the expanded PCI responsibilities come in. So a reference number is generated or an error message, but assuming the transaction goes through, then you'll get to step 3. Once the information is stored at the payment gateway, that a token is returned and it's essentially returned and it's at this point it's in our cloud. It's not in your JD Edwards yet. So once the payment gateway finishes processing, then they close the window and it's returned to the application. The user now needs to click on the update button to refresh the screen. So at this point, they click the update button and that's what pulls the information and runs a business function and writes that into JD Edwards. So that's what actually triggers a business function. And then the business function runs and it calls a web service on the Pay Cloud. It pulls the credit card token information from the payment database, passes it via a secure connection to the Logix server. And then that's written into the 2 main tables. One is a standard JD Edwards table, the F004201, and then we have a tag file that stores additional information, including that token or reference number that represents the card. And then they press the OK button, and that's what actually saves the order into the system. So that's essentially the flow for authorizing with a new credit card. The next scenario that I want to just walk through is when they do authorize by email. So this is a little different, as you'll see. So the first thing that they do is they click the button, and then this is where you have to pick your email address. They enter or pick the email address that triggers a function to call the payment server, and it sends an email that goes out to the customer for the purpose of them being able to make a payment. After this, the customer service representative saves the order and it's on hold until authorization is obtained. So now it's the customer side. The customer opens the email that they received from the PayCloud system. It opens a web page, contains an iframe where they can enter the credit card information. They then enter the information, and in some cases it could be configured. We have some customers that have transactions that are done in other countries that require a service called 3D Secure. So those capabilities exist depending on your gateway that you're using. But in any case, they need to key the card data. And the key difference between this and the authorized with new credit card is who's keying in the card data. In this case, the customer is doing it, so it's completely outsourced. Then they click the Pay Now, and it saves the order in the payment database. And then the final step, as I mentioned, is there's a UBE that's scheduled to run that pulls the data from the PayCloud, runs business functions on the logic server that write the data into Smarter Commerce tables, the same ones, and then the order can now be released and processed within JD Edwards. So essentially, this is kind of the end of that process. So at this point, I've covered everything around Smarter Commerce and PCI, and I hope this information was useful, and you can use this to improve the way that you're handling customer data, and perhaps consider using some of the new functionality to reduce your PCI compliance requirements. So I'm
Excellent.
going to hand it over to Jerry Van Dalen, so he can discuss a little bit about an upcoming conference that we have called Accelerate, which hopefully a lot of you may be able to attend, and we can see our customers face to face. So again,
Excellent.
thank you.
Yeah, Alex, appreciate the walkthrough of all that. Very informative information. Like I said, this is being recorded. We plan to have it on YouTube, publicly available later this week. Again, a big thank you for that. Just a final reminder here as we walk through last few items on today's agenda. Make sure if you have any questions still remaining, type those in. Alex will be answering them here for the last few minutes. As Alex wrapped up, he mentioned the Accelerate conference. For those of you that haven't seen any of the marketing information, Accelerate is the Smarter Commerce User Group conference that we are hosting this year in April. That's going to be April the 15th through the 17th. The next slide shows some details around the conference that I'd like to share with you guys. Alex, I think you can go to the next slide there. Yeah, so the goal here is to allow Smarter Commerce customers to maximize the value that they realize from their Smarter Commerce investment. I know we've got plenty of customers on today's session. We'd love to educate your team, equip your team, and empower you guys to take advantage of Smarter Commerce. Whether you're using one product like Smarter Commerce Payments, or if you're using some of our other products like Smarter Commerce e-commerce and our Avatax connector, for example. You'll see some details there, as I mentioned, April 15th through the 17th. That's less than 100 days away. We're hosting it locally, where we're based as an organization in Miami, Florida, in the wonderful brand new Laurel's Coral Gable Hotel. And we basically have two conference pass options for today's attendees. The first is just what we call an individual conference pass, which provides access to the entire agenda for the conference, and that includes sessions related to all of our product line, as well as payment-related sessions, and access to our customer appreciation party, which is going to be hosted in a yacht in Biscayne Bay. We're very excited for that. But there may be some customers on today's session which just say, hey, I don't think I can go for all 3 days. I'd like to just go for the payment-related content. And we've actually also created what we call the PayPal Mini Track. And so you can also purchase a mini track pass, which basically provides access to the focused set of smarter commerce payment related content on the agenda. PayPal has very generously sponsored that. We're very excited to partner with them. And we're going to have a bunch of really engaging, very important content. As Alex mentioned, Smarter Commerce itself is not a QSA, but we are going to be having a presentation shared by a QSA, somebody that's qualified in this field to share information very important around cybersecurity, credit card security, PCI, and so on. And so, yeah, we're very excited about what we've got rolling out for Accelerate. We do have a discount available for all customers that sign up using or for the PayPal mini track. And you can use the code PayPal at the moment of checkout to leverage a 20% discount for that registration. All this information is going to be shared as a follow-up to today's webinar. And so we wanted to make sure that customers were aware of this so that you guys can take advantage. Again, the PayPal mini track pass, it's a more economic option. You show up, you stay one night at the wonderful Coral Gables Lowe's, and then you can fly back the following day, having taken full advantage of all the payment and PayPal and PCI related content for the conference. So really excited about that. Want to make sure that that's on the radar for everybody here. If you have questions, reach out to us or respond to some of our webinar follow-up communication. But a final thank you to all the attendees today for participating. Thank you to all those that submitted questions. We hope that today's content has been informative and enriching. If you do have questions about PCI related material or smarter commerce related material, again, we'd love to open up a conversation. And finally, a final thank you to Alex Rodriguez for coordinating this presentation and organizing all this material. So with that said, everybody, thank you guys and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.